Hey everybody, how y'all doing this Sunday evening? I'm here. I know I've been gone for a minute. I'm slowing down a little bit. But on the preaching anyway, right now, online right now. It's got, I mean, I've been working, I've been doing some things, so. Also, I had a very horrible toothache for a few days, so I had to take some rest. But I prayed on it, and it's gone. The Lord took care of it. Anyway. So I'm here today. I gave a message this morning at the Rim, and I didn't know I was going to give another message today, but the Lord told me, said, "Hey, you haven't been there. You need to be there today." So He wanted me to work. That's what I'm doing. So the last message that I gave before I took the little break. Hold on just a second. I turned the dryer off for a minute so I can give the message. I just turned it off so I could give message because it was loud. That's my sister. She's checking the dryer for her clothes, so I turned it off because it was too loud. So I had to turn it back on when I'm done. So the last message I gave when I was here was on 1 Samuel 17 about David and Goliath. So we're in 1 Samuel 17. 18. Sorry. The last one was 1 Samuel 17. This is 1 Samuel chapter 18. And this chapter transitions from this victory that David had with Goliath to something that pertains to a lesson in the Bible about relationships and about how and mainly brotherhood. And one of the reasons why I had read this message or had read this chapter. Actually, the day after I gave my last message about David and Goliath, I had read this chapter and I was going to give this message that next day, but I didn't. And like I said, I've been caught up with a lot of things, and I think it was God's timing because this morning at the Rim, and I had totally forgot that this was my day, second Sunday. This was my first day back to the house after the ice storm and everything. Myself, they had went back. Everybody else had went back, but this was my first day back, and I had to preach. And I had totally forgot that this was second Sunday. Until I was reminded last night by Apostle that this was second Sunday, so I had to come up with a message last night, in which I did come up with a message on today being the eighth day and the eighth gate. That's the message I gave this morning. But what made me realize that I needed to just preach this message was this morning when Apostle talked about a unity, how we're supposed to treat our brothers and sisters, and about how we're supposed to be who we say we are, and we're not supposed to be offended at each other, and we're supposed to, we're supposed to treat each other, and be who we, like she said, be who we say we are. And then I come home and I watched another message that talked about the same thing. So I said, Lord, you want me to give this message, don't you, today? So here we are. So, we're in this chapter, 1 Samuel 18. And this is a chapter of transition between David's this public triumph of him taking down Goliath, and then this private life that he had in amongst the royal court. And this chapter is defined by this contrast between these types of relationships, which is like a contractual type relationship and covenant relationship, and then this envy of Saul toward David because of it. Not only because of the relationship, but because just in general, envy in general, and being offended by just who David was. In general. So, the chapter follows these three primary threads that weave together and show David's ascent. And the first, which is the main part of this chapter, is the covenant of friendship that David had with Jonathan. And it starts immediately after he has this battle with Goliath and the Philistines. He goes for Saul. And it shows he has the head, he has, they take him to, before Saul, he has his head of Goliath in his hand, and he's speaking to Saul. And Saul's like, whose son is this? And it tells him, he is the son of Jesse. And at this point, when he's brought before Saul, and here he is, he's fought this battle. They've seen what he's done. And he's brought before Goliath. And he's brought before Saul, Goliath's head in his hand. And he's standing before the court. And Jonathan is there. Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan is the heir. And as David speaks to Saul, Jonathan, it says that his soul was knit to the soul of David. He loved him, and his soul, he was knit to the soul of David. He saw David's heart and his character, and his spirit connected with David in such a way that this friendship was sparked and blossomed between them that was very strong. It was a bond. And if you think about something that is knit together, I want to talk about knitting something. It's a tie. It's bound. It's a knot. It's tied together. It's knit together. So, as a symbol of this is a form of in this culture. There was this symbolism that was when they wanted to form this type of friendship, a covenant bond, because it's not like a friendship today. Friendships today are not they're not covenantal they're more just acquaintance, whatever, but true friendships are covenantal, and some people have them, but a lot of people, don't. They more relationships today are most based on more contractual than they are anything else, unless they're family. But this type of friendship was like a familiar bond, but it was not family. It was close. It was even closer than that. It was past bloodlines because it was. They chose it. So as a symbol of this type of friendship that Jonathan wants to give to David is he takes his Jonathan gives David his robe and his armor and his sword. And it was more than a gesture of friendship. This was a symbolic abdication. He was saying, I'm the rightful heir to the throne. But I'm recognizing that God's hand is on David and I voluntarily yield my status. It was a way that he was recognizing that that David was chosen by God. But this type of covenantal friendship relationship in this context within this culture was called a parity covenant. But even though Jonathan was the heir and David was just a shepherd, in this in outward appearances, Jonathan was above David. And that's the way Saul treated their relationship. But Saul was the king and David was the servant. That was the contractual. It was not equals. But Jonathan saw the heart like God does. And he saw a heart like his own, so he treated David like his equal. And so this type of covenant was called called a parity covenant. And so we need to understand understand the depth of this relationship between David and Jonathan. We have to look at these ancient Near Eastern legal structures, which parity covenant is one of them. And like I said, even though Jonathan by birthright was his superior, he treated David like he was an equal. So that's why this parity covenant comes well as saying they were on equal footing. So what is a parity covenant? In biblical times, a parity covenant was an agreement between parties of equal status. And this is unlike there's another this, which was the suzerain vassal treaty, which was between a king and the subject, which was like what Saul treated it like. He was the king and David was his subject. But a parity covenant was about brotherhood. It was about agreement. And the key components of the parity covenant was that there was this exchange of identities. Participant. So that's where that came from, him swapping his robe and his weapons. He was giving David his robe and his sword, was saying that what is mine is yours, and your enemies are my enemies. And this word that's used in this verse, it calls about that it was knit, the soul was knit, as a Hebrew word which means bound. So this is suggests this legal and emotional tie that couldn't easily be unraveled. They were bound to one another, and it wasn't a light. It wasn't taking it lightly. This type of covenant was about self-sacrifice, and because in this type of covenant, one would give up their individual autonomy to protect the interest of the other. So that's what Jonathan was. It was it's a sacrificial type love, and I'll show how this relates to points directly to Jesus in a minute. So, though technically David, like I said, David and Jonathan were not equal, because Jonathan was the prince, the crown prince, and David was just, shepherd turned soldier. But in this act of Jonathan initiated the parity covenant. Jonathan was the one that took his robe and his sword, and he gave it to David. Now, in a parity covenant, though, David had to accept. And it shows at the end of this chapter that is exactly what had happened. But for this to be binding, but Jonathan initiated the parity covenant by treating David as his equal, and he gave him his robe and his sword. And so he chose not to see this. This was a radical act of humility, and he chose not to see David. To see David not as his rival or a servant, but as his equal brother. He was saying, you are not my servant, you're not my rival, you are my brother. And so, this mirrors the gospel where Christ, which is the prince, enters into a covenant with us, just as commoners, and elevates us to a status of co-heirs. Because that's what the Bible says, we are co-heirs together with him. We are his brothers. Male, female. It's brotherhood. It's the same difference. Sisterhood. It's this bond of this parity covenant. So, and we also see this in another story in the Bible. David and Jonathan is not the only one that teaches us this truth. There's a female contrast to this. Like I just said, this is brotherhood, sisterhood, it's the same difference. But there's a female contrast to this. It's another story that shows that this transcends the bounds of gender. I mean, it could be either way. So, this other story is Ruth and Naomi. And this bond between Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth is the female counterpart to this David and Jonathan bond. And the word covenant isn't explicitly used in this book, but the language that's used, where it says, how she clung. Ruth clung to Naomi, and she was loyal, and she pledged, to her that wherever you go, I'm not leaving you. Your God's my God, your people are my people. Wherever you die, that's where I'll be buried. David and Jonathan makes this similar pledge in this chapter. At the end, it says that may the Lord be witness between us and my seed and your seed forever. This is that's the pledge of the covenant of that parity covenant of that bond that they had. So the connection here is striking because in both these stories, because they play into that larger biblical narrative, but because Jonathan's covenant protected the line of David, which the Messiah came from, but Ruth's covenant brings her into the line of David. She was his great-grandmother, or great-grandmother. Both the stories show that God uses chosen family, people bound by spiritual covenants rather than just biological ones to advance his kingdom. This is part of that grafting in and the adoption that it talks about. God doesn't just look at bloodlines and go by bloodlines. God chooses whom he wills. And the family that is the kingdom family is an adopted one. It's a spiritual kinship. And it's built on covenants, spiritual covenants. Covenants that come from the heart. Not are based on contracts. A bloodline is a contract. We talk about covenants, marriages as a covenant, but a lot of people look at marriage as a contract these days instead of a covenant that it's supposed to be. Because they look at the worldly part of it, the contract, instead of the covenantal relationship, the spiritual part of it. A contract, this contractual type relationship is based on, deserving and what you can do for me and what I can do for you. And it's conditional. But these type of biblical covenants, these spiritual covenants, especially like the spiritual covenant, is not conditional. It's a sacrificial love. It's a sacrificial covenant. It's not based on what you can do for me. It's based on just who you are and that I choose you. It's the same type of relationship that we have with Christ, that Christ shows us, not because we deserve it, because he loves us. So now we go to the next part of this chapter. Talks about this jealousy part, where Saul became jealous of David because he heard these women singing that how Saul struck down 1,000, but David struck down 10,000, and this comparison, it shattered Saul's ego. Saul's ego was hurt because he thought that everybody liked David more than him. And so from that day on, Saul had a jealous eye on David. And this was part of that horrible spirit that came on Saul, because the Spirit of the Lord was on David. And it had departed from Saul. And so this harmful spirit had taken over Saul. And this harmful spirit looked on David and hated that spirit in him. And anytime anybody honored that spirit that was on David, and that Spirit of the Lord that was in David, and that harmful spirit didn't like it, and that horrible spirit would send Saul into a rage. And it began to torment Saul. And it leaded him twice to attempt to pin David to the wall with a spear. He even tried to kill Jonathan once with a spear. He tried to kill his own son. But he tried to kill David twice. And Jonathan had such a good heart that Jonathan didn't want to believe when David told him that David was trying to kill him. Jonathan said, "I don't believe it." And David said, "It's true. It's true. He's trying to kill me." And so David had run and hide, and Jonathan had to go figure out what the truth was when David didn't show up to the dinner with the king. But, Saul, last part of the chapter was where we got Saul trying to trap David and trying to put the stumbling block in front of him through one of his daughters. You know, the first one he was going to give it to him, but David was okay with that. But then he gave her to somebody else because I guess in a way he was trying to make David jealous and trying to make David trying to make David do something that was out of character in a way by promising him one daughter and then taking and giving her to somebody else. And that didn't work. And so then he found another daughter and he said, I'm going to give this one to her. And thinking that she was going to trip him up somehow. Because the second daughter didn't really like him, I think. But both of them, he was trying to snare him any way he could, trying to trap him and trip him up. That was a horrible spirit. That was the devil. That's what the devil does. He'll try to trap you and trip you up any way he can. Uh, One of them tried to, the first one that's, he seen him out there in a battle, cause he was hoping he was going to get killed, trying to earn the bride price. He sent him, he told him he had to go get all these, I think it was like 250 foreskins from the Philistines. He gave him this impossible task. He said what he thought was impossible task. And he thought it was so bad, it was such a impossible task that he'd go out there and he's fixing to get himself killed trying to earn this bride price to get one of these women. That's what they all thought. But the hand of the Lord was with David. It was meant to be, it was going to be. So David went out there and he did it. He relied on the Lord to provide and help him and do what he needed to do. And he accomplished the task and this was the Lord being with David because the Lord was trying to show Saul something and Saul was too stupid to realize it. So David goes out there and he brings it back and he's not dead. And instead of all these traps that's all laid for him, instead of nothing happened to David, he just kept growing in his success. He just kept getting more successful and more successful. More traps was laid for him. His hand of the Lord was on him. And the more that he grew in success, the more Saul's fear grew. The more his fear intensified because he started to realize that even his daughter loved David, and then she started to love David so much. And then of course Jonathan loved all his kids is loving David. He hates him. He's like, everybody just loves him. I just can't stand him. Because it wasn't David. It was the spirit. It was the harmful spirit in Saul. The Lord was with David, and that spirit just it didn't like that spirit, that good spirit. That's what happens in, as I was talking about, like, the unity of brotherhood, and when, like, what Apostle was talking about, when people act out of character, and people get offense, or people might get offended for no reason at all, really. They just see something and they think, I don't like that. They might have a bad spirit on them that's the devil's tempting them. The devil's trying to come in and disrupt and trying to say, hey, that person over there, they looked at you wrong. And all of a sudden everybody's, feeling funny about each other, and they're being uncomfortable, and they're acting strange with each other, and they're disrupting unity, and they get to talking with each other, and then the whole house is in uproar, and everything's disrupted, and the spirit can't flow. Everybody's distracted by the devil, and the Holy Ghost, the spirit's being quenched. So the key themes in this is that the nature of envy, Saul's downfall isn't caused by a lack of resources, but by a lack of peace. He views life as a zero-sum game, and if David is winning, Saul must be losing. It shows divine favor versus human schemes. Throughout the chapter, the phrase "the Lord was with him" repeats. Every time Saul sets a trap for David, it actually results in David gaining more fame and authority. And it also shows true versus false identity. Jonathan finds his identity in God's will, which allowed him to love David. But Saul found his identity in his position, and causing him to hate David. So, this chapter serves as a type or shadow of the New Testament narrative, where we see, like David, Jesus was the beloved who came from obscurity to save his people, and he was met with an initial praise, followed quickly by the murderous jealousy of the religious and political establishment, which were the Sauls of his day. But Jonathan represents the posture of a true disciple. And he recognizes the true king and lays down his robes, or his rights, status, and his life to follow him. And just as Saul attempts to kill David only led to David's eventual coronation, the enemies of Jesus intended the cross for his destruction, but God used it for his exaltation and the salvation of the world. To supply this to our spiritual growth, and to check the Saul in us. We often struggle when others receive 10,000s of praise when we get thousands. But spiritual growth requires us to kill the spirit of comparison by trusting that God's favor on someone else is not a rejection of us. We must look at the power of covenant community. Jonathan's friendship was a lifeline for David during a season of persecution. We're not meant to navigate the wilderness of our careers or lives alone. We need a soul-knit community. And we must trust God in the traps when you feel like you are being set up to fail, like David with Saul's demands. Remember that if God is with you, the very things intended for your harm can become the platform for your growth. In modern spiritual growth, we often settle. We have to have this covenant mindset. In modern spiritual growth, we often settle for contractual relationships. I'll be nice to you if you're nice to me. I'll do for you if you do for me. But both 1 Samuel 18 and in Ruth 1, it challenges us to move toward these covenantal relationships, where we see commitment over convenience. Jonathan stayed loyal even when David was a fugitive, and Ruth stayed even when Naomi was bitter. And it highlights intercessory love, just as Jonathan stood between Saul's spear and David, and Ruth stood between Naomi and starvation. We are called to stand in the gap for our brothers and sisters. The main insight of this chapter is that uh, the difference between the contractual church goer and a covenantal disciple. The contractual churchgoer asks, what is the community doing for me? If the music is bad or the thousands versus 10,000s comparison hurts their ego, they want to leave. They get a slight offense. I want to go somewhere else. But the covenantal disciple asks, to whom am I knit? They realize that their robes and swords, talents and resources are for the protection and elevation of their brothers and sisters. Because covenant is not about what we deserve, but about who we belong to. And ultimately, we belong to Christ. And we're supposed to treat each other as He would want us to treat each other. We're supposed to treat each other with the same type of relationship that we have with Him. And our relationships that we have with others are a reflection of that relationship. So in summary, 1 Samuel 18 presents the striking collision between two kingdoms, the kingdom of self represented by Saul's consuming envy and the kingdom of covenant represented by Jonathan's sacrificial love. While Saul views life through a contractual lens where every 10,000 given to another is a loss for himself, Jonathan enters into a parity covenant with David. Though the rightful heir, Jonathan voluntarily abdicated his status, stripping off his royal robe and armor to equip a shepherd. This upside-down covenant serves as a powerful type of Christ. Just as Jonathan the prince was knit to David the shepherd, Jesus emptied himself of his heavenly standing to enter into a covenant with us. And for our reflection questions, we have to ask, is there a specific area where God is asking you to abdicate your own agenda to support the growth or success of someone else? And how can you practice covenant love this week by actively celebrating someone else's success, specifically in the area where you feel competitive? And who are the people in your life to whom you are bound by covenant rather than just common interests? If you don't have a Jonathan or a Ruth, what is one step you can take to move a relationship from a contractual level to a covenantal one? It got dark on me. That's okay, we got through it. I love y'all. That's the message for tonight. I'll see y'all next time.